So, hello everybody. Thanks for joining this class, either in person or in recorded video on YouTube. There's Elizabeth, and this is a meeting of the traditional Buddhist chanting class that meets on the first and third Tuesdays every month. And right now we're looking at the Kanzeon Chant, also known as the 10 Phrase Kannon Sutra, or the Extend Life 10 Phrase Kannon Sutra. And we'll talk about the various titles. So this is the second class, and I'm going to we're going to start the class after this very brief introduction with actually doing the chant together. So I'm going to share my screen now so that we can do that. And mute myself.
Enmei juku kannon yo
Kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojo nen kanzeon bonen kanzeon nen chushin ki nen furishin kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojo nen kanzeon bonen kanzeon nen chushin ki nen furishin kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojo nen kanzeon bonen kanzeon nen chushin ki nen furishin kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojo nen kanzeon bonen kanzeon nen chushin ki nen furishin kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojo nen kanzeon bonen kanzeon nen chushin ki nen furishin kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojo nen kanzeon bonen kanzeon nen chushin ki nen furishin kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojo nen kanzeon bonen kanzeon nen chushin ki nen furishin kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojo nen kanzeon bonen kanzeon nen chushin ki nen furishin kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojo nen kanzeon bonen kanzeon nen chushin ki nen furishin.
Okay, so before I jump into whatever it is I'm about to jump into, are there questions or things anybody wants to bring up or talk about, or anything you don't want me to talk about? Say, Kurt, don't talk about this. That can happen. Oh, well, I mean, speaking of which, we will talk a little bit about hell in this class. It comes up, but I blame Hakuin for that. Hakuin, we're going to talk a little bit more about Hakuin. And he kind of was a little obsessed with the Buddhist concept of hell. We'll get to that. Okay. I'm not seeing any, let's see. So I can just find my, okay, here it is. And make sure I got the right place. Yep. Okay. So now I'm going to share my screen again. And if anything does come up, and if there is something that you want me to talk about, or if I start talking about something that you don't want me to talk about and you want me to stop, just, unmute yourself and shout out. Okay. So, let's see now. I'm going to go into slideshow mode. So this is the Kanzeon Chant right here that's being displayed on your computer or tablet or phone screen, whatever you're watching this on. This is the whole chant. This is very similar to a slide that we looked at 2 weeks ago. Except for now, what's highlighted is the lines that we're going to be focusing on tonight. These 3 lines. So the whole chant is Enmei Juku Kannon Gyo Kanzeon Namu Butsu Yo Butsu Uen Yo Butsu Uen Bupo Soen Jo Raku Gajo Chonen Kanzeon Bonen Kanzeon Nennen Jushinki Nennen Fudishin. Now let's see. I should be able to. I have. Let's see. I'm in. Let me. Something's not quite working right here. I'm going to try this again. Go into slideshow mode. Okay, that's better. I think I clicked the wrong button. I didn't have my laser pointer. Okay, all right. So, one of the great virtues of this chant is its shortness. Okay, so I just read it through real quick right there. When we do the chant, the recording that we use, we do the chant 9 times. And so it's good. This is so, and over here is the a translation. I don't know. This is kind of something I cobbled together to try to make something that was fairly literal, but at the same time kind of makes sense in English. It's really not a translation. It's just an indication of what the characters mean. And I'm going to talk a little bit about translations tonight. I'm not going to have much of anything good to say about translations, especially if they are presented as translations. If a translation is presented as, well, here's an interpretation or a paraphrase or a literal translation of the characters one at a time, that's okay. But to try this chant in particular to try to translate it's so dense, and it says something to my limited understanding of the chant. It says something quite profound and powerful in a highly condensed form, and you really don't want to mess with it, in my opinion. Although it is a very good idea to know what it is that you're chanting to the extent that you can understand it, which at least in my case is a very limited extent. And so anyway, so the 3 lines in particular that I'm going to talk about tonight, Yo butsu en, yo butsu en, bupo so en. With Buddha, I have causes or cause. With Buddha, I have connection. This word connection here can be translated or interpreted in many different ways. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, connected. And so I'm going to talk about that some more. This is the 3 lines with the characters written very big, with the transliteration, what we actually chant, written big in red. Yo butsu u in, yo butsu u en, bu po, so, en. And going through these characters one at a time, this is the pinyin Mandarin. But when we chant it, we use the Sino-Japanese pronunciation, which is yo. And it means with or together with. Then there's good old Buddha, which often in Japanese, the Buddha is one of the characters that is pronounced with 2 syllables, so it's butsu. In Chinese, or if you use the Korean pronunciation, it's always 1 syllable per character. But this is one of the places where in Japanese they use 2 syllables. Which is a very nice, very handy. If you ever study any Chinese, or if you ever study any Japanese, this is one of the characters that you'll learn early on. This is to have. It's just a very common everyday word in Chinese and in Japanese, to have. And in is cause, and this is one of the things we will have reason to talk more about what this means. So with is, together with Buddha, okay? This is a Buddhist chant, so to say there's something that you have together with the Buddha, that sounds, reasonable. But what is this thing? So that's the place in this line where there's maybe a little bit more need to look into what's going on. The second line is, so this is actually the third line of the chant. We did the title, and the first 2 lines were in the previous class. So this class we're starting with the 3rd line, and this is the 4th line, and this is the 5th line. And in this case, unlike in the Heart Sutra and most other chants, the line numbers in this particular chant are for real. It's called the 10 Phrase Kannon Sutra. There's 10 phrases. There's one phrase per line. If you ever look at the Heart Sutra, sometimes people write it without any breaks whatsoever, and it's a mess. Sometimes in calligraphies, they'll write it, top to bottom or left to right, and then they just decide how many columns are going to do it. And so like every row has the same number of characters in it, or every column has the same number of characters in it, which is also kind of a mess. But anyway, but in this particular chant, the line numbering is set in stone, basically. So this is line number 3, and line number 4 is almost exactly the same. It just says yo butsu en. So now we have in and en. This is cause, and this is condition. Or this can be the direct cause, and this can be the indirect cause, or this can be connection or affinity. There's lots. We're going to talk more about that. And please ask questions if or provide answers. If you know what this means, tell me. Anyway, bupo so en. So this line, the 5th line, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and then again, whatever this is. And it's kind of implied here. This u is left out in this line for the rhythm of it, I guess. This is a poem. The rhythm is a chant. The rhythm is important. Yo butsu en, bupo so en. It does have a very, very, very nice rhythm to it. It's a wonderful, wonderful chant, and which is completely lost in all the translations. Yeah, there's no translation that matches in any way the wonderful rhythmic quality of this chant. Okay, so causes and conditions, what are they? And so I looked up the character for in, which is go back just again to look at these characters. This is in, this is cause. This is en, this is condition, okay? And there's other ways of translating these 2 characters, but for the most part, that's what I'm going to stick with. Cause is the first one, in, and condition is the second one, en. All right, so if we look up this character in the in one of my favorite things on the internet is the Digital Dictionary of Buddhism. A cause, or in, that which produces a result. Now, this is basically that which produces a result. This is, circular logic, right? A cause is something that produces a result. Well, what is a result? A result is something that's brought about by a cause. I mean, nevertheless, that's the way. And notice that we're talking in this class. We're talking about causes and conditions, which both have to do with results. And I'm just going to go back once again to the full chant. The result is here, the next line that we're going to do in the next class. Jo raku gajo, eternity, bliss, self, and purity. So it's a good result that we're going for. Okay. All right. So in, or cause, is that which produces a result. And so some of the synonyms or other ways of saying it: a cause, a seed, an origin, an element, a root. In Sarvastivadin teachings, with Sarvastivadin, which is an ancient school of Buddhism that many of their writings have survived, and they were big on analyzing things. So if you want to find a definition, they had definitions. They were big on definitions. In Sarvastivadin teachings, cause is divided into 6 kinds. And so this is the character for 6, and this is the character again for cause. So just to look up 6 causes in the Digital Dictionary of Buddhism, you would put this in and do a search. So in contrast, so this is cause in contrast to conditions, which in Sanskrit is prachaya. Now, where do I have it here? Sanskrit cause is hetu, okay? Although there's other Sanskrits for it, but the primary Sanskrit for this character, this character here is the Chinese translation of the Sanskrit hetu. Okay. All right. So in contrast to prachaya, which is condition, the term refers to the primary or most intimately related cause of an effect. Effect is another way of saying result. All right. In the case of the relationship between causes and conditions, cause refers to a more internal and direct cause, while condition refers to external, auxiliary, and indirect causes. And then I'm just going to go back again to you might notice I have pictures of seedlings and plants growing. And here as well, because that's the most common way in Buddhism. When Buddhists talk about causes and conditions, the standard way of explaining why you want to talk about both causes and conditions is actually to jump down to the bottom of the slide. The seed is the cause, okay? But if you just have a seed, if you take out a seed, I have packets of seeds, at home. I buy packets of seeds to grow flowers and green beans and whatever. And they don't grow if they're just sitting in a drawer somewhere in the seed packet that I bought them in, or when you go to Home Depot or wherever you buy your seeds, you don't see them. They're not growing. They just sit there. They have to have soil, sunlight, rain, and the right combination of things, the right conditions, and then they grow. Okay, so the seed will not grow. Well, the seed will grow only under the right conditions. But if you have all those right conditions present, nothing happens unless there is a seed there. Okay, so you have to have both. So this is all really what we're talking about. Really, when we talk about causes and conditions and seeds and sunlight, this is all karma, and karma is very non-linear, basically. Anyway, so going back up again, it's important to kind of have some idea, just as the reason why talking about seeds and plants helps us to understand what we mean by causes and conditions is because we can see it. We can see the result. There's some result. There's some effect that the plant is the effect that we can understand how the cause leads to the result. in Buddhism, very often, when we talk about cause and effect, or when we talk about karma, we're talking about suffering, right? But in fact, and this is what I have here. So I'm actually doing this slide kind of from the bottom up. Often in Buddhism, when the subject is causes and conditions, this is referring to the causes and conditions of suffering. But it can also refer to the causes and conditions of Buddhahood, which is not only, Buddhahood is not only the absence of suffering, but it is the ability to relieve the suffering of others as well. And so that kind of, when you're talking about that kind of causes, then you're talking about religious practice, Buddhist practice, the practice of the Bodhisattva based on the arousal of bodhicitta, and the period during which the Bodhisattva is practicing, which is the time when the Bodhisattva is on the path to Buddhahood. So this path to Buddhahood is the cause of Buddhahood. And so really, this section of the Kanzeon Chant is about the Bodhisattva path. So when you talk about the Bodhisattva path, or the path to Buddhahood, or the causes and conditions of Buddhahood, Buddha nature is the seed. It's the in of Buddhahood. But Buddha nature can be a lot like the seed packet sitting in a drawer. Unless they have the right conditions, Buddha nature lies dormant until the arousal of bodhicitta and the taking up of the practices of a bodhisattva. And so here's the digital dictionary of Buddhism's entry for en, this character here. Bupo so in is the causes, bupo so en is the conditions. It's an indirect cause, secondary cause, associated conditions, causal situation, causal conditions. Again, the Sanskrit is pratyaya. The Tibetan is, however this is pronounced. Tibetan is impossible to pronounce if you've ever studied any Tibetan. The Japanese, by contrast, is very easy to pronounce en. All things are subject to the principle of cause and effect, but there are conditions, circumstances that aid the causes that produce an effect. Now, so it's saying that they aid the cause is putting it a little bit mildly, because without the conditions, there is no effect. You have to have both causes and conditions. Given the strong attention that Buddhism pays in general to matters of causation, of course, karma is, whenever we say causation, cause effect, causes and conditions in Buddhism, we're talking about karma. Or at least karma is another word that can be used to talk about the same thing, especially as seen in the theory of dependent, speaking of different words to be used to talk about the same thing, dependent arising. The matter of associated causes and factors is seen in almost any discussion of Buddhism. Seen in contrast with in, the direct or fundamental cause is en. Hetu is like a seed, pratyaya, the soil, rain, sunshine, etc. So even the digital dictionary of Buddhism eventually must use the analogy of the. See, when the conditions are right, you know, some plants are a lot more hardy than others, right? This is a weed growing up through the cracks of this is not a seed that has been planted and watered and cared for and fertilized. This is a seed that just happened to get into the right place at the right time and find the right conditions, even though whoever put the rest of these conditions in didn't want that to be there. And this is, you know, we don't necessarily live in ideal conditions for following the Bodhisattva path. Okay? It's important for us to, you know, from a standpoint of Buddhist teaching, it's important for us to appreciate and realize that we do in fact have the cause, which all beings everywhere do, but we also have the right conditions. And this is the little weed that yeah, it's a good example. Okay, so I've been talking about especially these two words, in and an, cause and condition. Let's see. Yeah, so there are a lot of different translations of the Kannon Sutra. It's very interesting to look at the translations, even though, in my opinion, especially, and so I this sounds harsh, but I think it's justified. It's interesting to look at the different translations, but most of them are terrible. And I say that with appreciation for the people who have made the effort, the sincere effort, to try to help people like me. I don't speak Japanese. I don't speak Chinese. I need people to try to translate these things for me to be able to better understand them. So why do I say they're terrible? Well, one of the problems with these translations is that very often people want their translation to be accepted as the correct interpretation of the chant, or they want people to actually chant their translation. And compared to chanting the original, it's just no good. This is poetry, and poetry is almost impossible to translate. Translations of poetry can be very interesting and useful, but as poetry, they usually are not any good, unless they're complete. Well, anyway, I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. And it helps us to, anyway, so I could go to this link and look at all these different things. This is this not only has a dozen different translations of the Kanzeon Chant in it, it also has 3 different Dharma talks given by Zen teachers on the meaning of the chant. And there's a lot of really wonderful information here. This is from the Dharma Rain Zen Center in Portland, Oregon. In fact, I am going to, I'm going to click on this, see what happens. Okay, this is good. Yeah. So here's what happens when you click on that link. First thing shows up, this has got, with the Chinese characters and everything. Go through, it's got quite a, this is actually one thing that's interesting to look at. When Sojun Roshi gave a little talk on the Kanzeon Chant, and then asked for questions, somebody immediately said, "Where does this sutra come from?" Which is something we're going to talk about later on. And he said, "This is not a particularly good answer. Sutras are supposed to come from India." Yeah, but where does this sutra come from, Roshi? And then another student asked, "What does the sutra mean?" And then, so I'm not going to go into great detail on this, but Sojun Roshi goes into a very interesting theory that many people have about where do Mahayana sutras come from. That Mahayana sutras may not have been taught by the Buddha in his Nirmanakaya form. They, some of them, or maybe all, were taught in the Buddha's Sambhogakaya form, if you're familiar with the 3 bodies. And if you're not, this is an interesting to look at. I would say it's definitely worth looking at this. I know that Shunryu Suzuki Roshi used to tell his students that he believed that the Lotus Sutra in particular was taught by the Buddha in his Sambhogakaya form, not in his Nirmanakaya form. Okay, now I've got 5 minutes to go before we get to a break, so I'm going to go. Let's see. Okay. The 3 lines that we're looking at in this class all have to do with the causes and conditions of the Bodhisattva path. So what is and again, this is somewhat repetitious, but the one direct, indispensable, immediate cause of Buddhahood is universal Buddha nature. But since this Buddha nature pervades the whole universe, it is present everywhere at all times. So why aren't we all Buddhas yet? So what are the causes and conditions that for that seed of Buddha nature to grow, for us to actually begin to walk on the Bodhisattva path? Well, one of the things, so you can go into great detail about, what is the Bodhisattva path? And many books are written about it. But in my opinion, when we chant this sutra, by the very act of chanting the sutra, we are demonstrating that those of us who are chanting the sutra, already have not only the primary cause, which is Buddha nature, but also all of the necessary secondary conditions. And the more we chant, the stronger those conditions become. This is actually a way of, and so this, I'm going to go back into slideshow mode, just make things slightly bigger. And so, N, I said there's more than one way to translate that. One way of translating it that a lot of people like is affinity. And so if you think of it in terms of affinity, then by doing certain practices, you can increase that affinity. And this practice, in particular, the practice of chanting Kanzeon, we can increase our affinity with the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha by chanting the Extend Life 10 Phrase Kannon Sutra. And that's one of those theories that even if it's wrong, it's still good. People generally recognize that it's good to chant this chant. People really like chanting it. Many people report all kinds of wonderful results that they get from chanting it. I'm telling you that it will increase your affinity with the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and that it will further you along the Bodhisattva path. Okay. Right. Now, I'm going to jump back to Hakuin. So we're going to take a break in just a minute, but I want to just remind people a little bit about the story of Hakuin, who was Hakuin was a pretty crazy guy in the first place. He never did anything by halves. He was just, and so when he decided that this chant, the 10 Phrase Kannon Sutra, was a good thing, he just went nuts. I mean, he would encourage everybody to do it. If you were sick, he said you should do it. If you were a student of his who was working on koans, he said you should do this chant. And then a very interesting thing happened in, let's go back several slides, back to where I talked about this in the last class. Just kind of set the stage. Here it is. In Takayama city in Japan, where Hakuin had encouraged people to do the Kanzeon Chant, and people had taken up the practice of the Kanzeon Chant, and then a series of unfortunate events ensued in the city of Takayama, which Hakuin wrote about afterwards, after having heard of them from people, including many of his students in Takayama. And so I'm going to get back to that after the break, which we will now take a 5-minute break. More or less right on schedule. Let's see if I can get out of this. Yeah, okay. So, and then, of course, there'll be a chance for questions and discussion after the break when we come back as well. Okay. Okay, break is over. And yeah. Still, let's see. All right. So in the previous class, we looked at this story about something that happened in the city of Takayama, where a 14-year-old boy was suddenly possessed by the Okami Inari, or the Inari Okami. And this was when the boy was possessed by the Inari Okami, the kami spoke through him for so this possession took place over a period of 3 days and nights. And this is from the last class when we talked about this. It focused on just focused on what the kami said through this boy on the first 2 nights. The last night, the third night, is what I'm going to talk about now, which goes directly to this question of the relationship between the Kanzeon Chant and the path to Buddhahood, the Bodhisattva path. Because, well, we'll see. Okay. So on the third night, at sundown the following day, that is, this is after the second night when the kami spoke through the yukichi, the yukichi, I guess, probably closer to the boy's pronunciation. People packed into the extremely cramped quarters of the room adjacent to Yukichi's chambers and began performing the usual 100 repetitions of the 10-phrase Kannon Sutra. So the Inari Okami had already castigated the people of Takayama for the fact that they had been practicing the Kannon Sutra, but they had stopped. And so now they were back at it again. And every time they came to hear what the kami had to say to them, they made sure to chant 100 repetitions of the 10-phrase Kannon Sutra before and afterwards. And so when they had finished chanting, the doors open and the deity began to speak. Well, I am glad to see such a large gathering. This will be the last time I address you. And then, what is to be, so I'm just going to read this. This is some interesting stuff, okay? What is to be, and this is from the Hakuin's Precious Mirror Cave. This is a collection of Hakuin's writings, translated into English by Norman Waddell. Or Waddell, I don't know how his last name is pronounced, and it's a collection. This is specifically from the part of that collection that's just called the story of Yukichi. What is to be feared above all else? And this is the kami. This is the Inari Okami speaking through Yukichi, and this is of course Hakuin describing what the Inari Okami said through the boy Yukichi. So it's this is Hakuin basically, okay? This something like this actually happened, but he wrote about it and wrote it in his own way. What is to be feared above all else are the 8 terrifying hells that await beings in the next existence. The unspeakable suffering of the great shrieking hell, the hells of the red lotus, the great red lotus, the scorching heat, and so on. If anyone were to glimpse even from a great distance the agony victims undergo, etc. If you're familiar with Buddhist teachings on hell, this is pretty standard, although Hakuin is giving it the Hakuin treatment here and really laying it on thick. Because of this, because you're going to hell otherwise, you must devote yourselves assiduously to the 10-phrase Kannon Sutra, repeated over and over. So that's point number one. That's bullet point number one from the Inari for this evening's PowerPoint presentation that the Inari is giving to the people of Takayama. The most important thing, bullet point number two, the most important thing you can accomplish during your sojourn on Earth is to attain Satori, the breakthrough known as Kensho. Unless you do that, it won't matter how many good deeds you perform, because none of them will bring any merit or benefit at all. As useless as painting pictures in the water or cultivating flowers in the air, even if you practice the most rigorous austerities for 20 or 30 years and experience the incalculable joy of 18 great satoris. So now all of a sudden, see, now the Inari is going from saying the most important thing is to chant the Kanzeon. Then the Inari says the most important thing is to attain Satori. But now the Inari is saying, even if you experience 18 great Satoris, if you lack Bodhi mind, this is bodhicitta, because you do not encounter a true teacher and learn from the practice that goes on, you will be unable to avoid falling into the horrendous torments of the hellish regions. So there's a little bit of a moving target here, but once the Inari, or Hakuin describing what the Inari is talking about, once it hits on the subject of Bodhi mind, which is just, so this is, Norman Waddell is a really good translator, so I don't want to mess with his translation. But what he's translating here is the word bodhicitta into English. So he's leaving Bodhi untranslated, but wants to translate mind, chitta as mind. This is actually shin in the Japanese, the Sino-Japanese. But this is bodhicitta. So you could chant, Kanzeon all you want. You can have 18 great Satoris, but if you lack the Bodhi mind, you're still going to hell. By Bodhi mind, I mean the mind that undertakes the practice that comes after Satori, which consists of proceeding forward and deepening your own enlightenment, while at the same time helping those who have been left behind to achieve awakening as well. It is the great and wonderful activity constantly teaching the Dharma, bringing joy by relieving suffering and rejoicing at the freedom and happiness thus attained, and yet through it all remaining completely unattached. This, it is said, creates the causes and conditions for a Buddha land on earth. So here we're back to causes and conditions. And so there's kind of a lot that's packed into here, right here. But the important thing is post-Satori practice, that is, once you achieve your own enlightenment, this is what really being a bodhisattva is all about. You didn't achieve your own enlightenment, or you're not seeking your own enlightenment for yourself. You're achieving whatever it is that you're achieving for those who have been left behind, for everyone else. Okay. And that's the purpose. That's the real goal of your practice. And then the Inari starts talking about, or Hakuin describing what the Inari is saying, starts talking about the Vimalakirti Sutra. In the Vimalakirti Sutra, layman Vimalakirti says, "It is like one lamp lighting up 100,000 lamps. All the darkness becomes brightness, and the brightness is never exhausted, because a single bodhisattva arouses in 100,000 living beings the Bodhi mind that seeks supreme perfect enlightenment. The bodhisattva activity of spreading the Dharma is unceasing. This is the meaning of the Inexhaustible Lamp." And so Inexhaustible Lamp was one of Hakuin's favorite phrases. In fact, let me see. Here I have it. When Hakuin's most senior student, Torei Enji, decided to write his, this is the how-to manual for Hakuin-styled Zen, and it's called Discourses on the Inexhaustible Lamp, written by Hakuin's, so not necessarily his most senior disciple, because Torei Enji was actually one of his younger disciples, but one of his most important, and one of the people who really carried on the tradition and is really responsible for what people think of as Hakuin style Zen. All right. So the inexhaustible lamp, it is also the cause and condition. So here it is again, cause and condition for creating a Buddha land on earth. And the inspiring, let's see. Okay. The primary objective for superior students. Well, I'm hoping that it's not only for superior students. I'm hoping I can get in on this as well. But this is Hakuin's style of talking. He always, and this is a kind of upaya, to appeal to people who want to be superior students. Okay, which is cool. And it's good to have that aspiration. You should never think of yourself as a superior student, though. You should aspire to it, but never try to kid yourself that you are one. All right. Must be to become such a lamp. To do that, you must arouse a great burning desire, vowing to follow the way with dauntless courage, enduring infinite pain and suffering, grudging neither life nor limb, until you achieve a kensho of such clarity that you can see it as though you are looking at the palm of your hand. We can say in describing the inexhaustible lamp that its wick, okay, and this is really cool, in my opinion. The wick of the lamp is the koans, the claws and fangs. So this is extremely typical Hakuin talking here. The claws and fangs of the Dharma cave that bring about true and authentic kensho. The base on which the lamp stands is the benevolent heart and body that is always unwaveringly firm. The oil of the lamp is the heart of great compassion that strives to lead sentient beings to liberation. That's the oil of the lamp, okay? And I put this bold in there because, well, you'll see. To eliminate their suffering and bring them happiness. That the flame of the lamp is the body of great wisdom, whose true aspect is essentially formless and non-dual. The light that the lamp gives off is the Dharma, preaching, boundlessly great, imparted unceasingly, with perfect freedom and eloquence to all beings in accordance with their different capacities, even till the end of time. Among these, what must be specially valued, what must be scrupulously replenished, is the oil of great compassion that strives to lead beings to liberation by preaching the Dharma. There is no Bodhi mind apart from this. If you were to place 1,000 wicks, even 10,000 wicks on a lampstand, you would produce light to brilliantly illuminate the four directions. But once the oil was exhausted, you wouldn't need wind to extinguish them. They would die out of themselves. The oil is the Bodhi mind of great. So this is so the cause, I said before, is Buddha nature. But then so the Buddha nature is always there. This is also kind of the most important of the conditions, Bodhi mind or bodhicitta, which must be, where does it say it? It has to be continuously replenished, scrupulously replenished. Okay, how do you do that? Chanting Kanzeon. All right. Okay, now, that's all I'm going to talk about Hakuin and Yukichi and the Inari Okami and spirit possession. I mean, this is a story about spirit possession. Okay, it's not necessarily the usual thing that you encounter in Western Zen, which often filters out stories about spirit possession and stuff like that. But you can't get more Zen than Hakuin. And so like I do not practice. I've never studied in Japanese. Well, actually, when I first started practicing Zen, I was in Hakuin's tradition, in the tradition of Joshu Sasaki Roshi, very prominent Rinzai Zen master for a couple of years, but I quickly moved into the orbit of Zen Master Daigak, Furnace Mountain, in the Korean Zen tradition. But the influence of Hakuin on Western Zen is inescapable, and we shouldn't be, I think, too insular or sectarian. And Hakuin's interesting, funny, weird, crazy guy. Anyway, but one of the things in the last class when I was dragging Hakuin into this discussion was that Hakuin himself said, when he was asked where does this sutra come from, he didn't say, sutras are supposed to come from India. He said, and he gave the story of the guy who was in prison to be executed the next day, who was taught this 10-phrase sutra in a dream, and then was spared miraculously. Hakuin told that story, and that's a story from China, all right, which Hakuin explained to people. Now, in this wonderful book by Chunfang Yu, Kuan Yin, the Chinese transformation of Avalokiteshvara, which is one of my absolute favorite books on Buddhism, she talks a lot about the origin of the 10-phrase Kannon Sutra in China. And this is a quote from her book. The origin of this scripture lies with the story about a person being saved from imprisonment and impending execution by chanting this very sutra revealed by Kuan Yin. The miracle moved King Kao, who was supposedly the ruler of where this happened, who pardoned the prisoner and spread the sutra. But who was this unfortunate prisoner, and who was King Kao? Buddhist chronicles and secular history suggest at least three different candidates. So Wang Xuanmo, Lu Qingyu, and Sung Qingtai. Sung Qingtai was the person that Hakuin specifically referenced. And he's one of the people who comes up in these stories, his miracle stories about a prisoner who was miraculously saved from execution. And they lived, they lived over a period of 150 years or more from each other. So it's the historical origins of this are not very well nailed down. And who was King Kao? And he could be no other than Cao Huan, the powerful prime minister. And so Cao also means big shot. Okay, so King Kao King Kao is often translated into English as the high king or the great king. Okay, so it isn't necessarily. Yes, there was a king named Kao, but it doesn't necessarily refer to the guy named Kao. Anyway, so when she's talking about this, and she herself, she herself admits, or not admits, but states this quite clearly. It isn't clear exactly which scripture is being referred to. It may or may not be this Extend Life 10-phrase Kannon Sutra, because in the historical records, it's referred to as King Kao's Quan Shi Yin, or King Kao's or High King Kao, Quan Shi Yin Sutra. Is that the same as the 10-phrase Kannon Sutra? Now, there is currently, and has been for quite some time in China, a sutra that has this name. And it is much longer. It doesn't have 10 phrases. It has many phrases. Well, it's not like the Lotus Sutra, but it's much longer compared to the 10-phrase sutra, it's much longer. It does have parts that are very similar and a few parts that are exactly the same as the 10-phrase Kannon Sutra. So sorting out the relationship between the King Kao Quan Shi Yin Sutra and the Extend Life 10-phrase Kannon Sutra is a little messy. And one thing that makes them even messier is that whatever they are, both of these sutras have different names. And some of them and both of them can be referred to at times as just the Kuan Yin Sutra, which is also the name that's often given to the 25th chapter of the Lotus Sutra, when it's treated as a separate sutra. So there is a fairly early source going back to 983. Now, if you look at these dates for the three people who are most likely to be the person that the story is about, one is from sometime in the between 388 and 468. Another one is sometime around the mid 500s, and the other one's in the 6th century. So again, sometime in the 500s. Several hundred years later, there is a record of someone talking about this story and giving the entire text of the 10-phrase Kannon Sutra in this telling of the story. And so Wang dreamt of a person telling him that if he recites the Kuan Yin Sutra 1,000 times, he can escape from his disaster. Wang answered that, well, thanks, but that doesn't do me any good, basically, because I won't have enough time. And then the person that he was seeing in this dream or vision taught him to chant Quan Chi Yin, adoration of the Buddha. There is a cause linking me with the Buddha. There is a condition linking me with the Buddha. Buddha and Dharma are mutually linked. Eternity, bliss, true self of purity. I call Quan Chi Yin in the morning. I call Quan Chi Yin in the evening. Each call comes from the mind. Buddha invocation is not separate from the mind. And that's essentially word for word the one translation of the Kanzeon Chant. When Wang woke up, he chanted it 1,000 times. When he was about to be executed, he was spared. So that sounds good, but this source doesn't give the title of this sutra. So it doesn't say this is the King Kao Quan Chi Yin Sutra. So it's still a big question mark, or at least, a big question mark. And there are other versions of this story that don't give, this exact rendition or any version of it. So the this right here, this is from the extended record of the Taiping era, written in 983, and yeah, it doesn't state that this is the 10-phrase Kannon Sutra, or it doesn't state that it is the King Kao Sutra. It doesn't give the title. So it's not quite a slam dunk. Several centuries after that, so now it's almost 300 years after that, in another the record of the lineage of the Buddha and the patriarchs, which was compiled in 1269 by a Tentai priest named Chipan. This one explicitly states that the 10-phrase sutra was the original form of the King Kao Sutra. Okay, and so this is a quote saying that the sutra only has 10 sentences. It was no other than the one transmitted to Wang Xuanmo and Sung Ching-te. So two of the people who are associated with different stories are both mentioned by this later source. And then it says, oh, but people of later generations have expanded it capriciously so that its phraseology has become vulgar and uneven, causing knowledgeable people to doubt its authenticity. Okay, so this says, yes, there was originally this very short chant. It got, people messed with it. People wanted something more fancy. And then he tells about another miracle story associated with the chant. So that actually does sound like it could be, that this was the original form of the King Kao Sutra, and which later became longer. But actually, if you look at the King Kao Sutra, which I'm going to show in a minute, let's see, what do I have? Oh yeah, that's the next slide. If you look at the King Kao Sutra, the similarities are not that great. They just aren't, and I'm going to show that in a minute. And so Chung Van Yu does address this in an endnote. So she does, when she points this out, she doesn't say, there it is, that settles it, it's all done. She leaves it as something that is still being looked at, and she in a footnote talks about how so the first 6 phrases of the 10 phrases, the Kanzeon, Namu Butsu, Yo Butsu Uen, Yo Butsu Uen, Bupo Soen, Jo Raku Ga Jo. Okay, those are the first 6 phrases. You can find, if you look hard enough, you can find those phrases in the King Kao longer King Cow Sutra. Okay. Oh, and I should just say, why is this important? Okay. So the reason why it's important, I think, is because it's good to know where things come from. And as I explained, a long time ago, when I was much younger, I did study for a while in a group, practice with a group that was part of the Rinzai tradition. But I'm a student of one of the greatest Korean Zen masters in modern times and in possibly of all time, Zen Master Seung-san, and his student Zen Master Daegak, my teacher. And so I'm very, I don't like to think that I'm like attached or obsessed or fixated on my own particular tradition. But for the most part, I do think it's important to have a connection with the tradition and to practice in that tradition, to appreciate and to learn from other traditions, but especially when it comes to what you practice, it can be a very slippery slope to just say, oh, look at that chant over there, let's try that. Or, you can do that with your own. In fact, I think people should do that with their own personal practice, to whatever extent that they're inclined to do that. But for a group of people to practice together, they have to have a common tradition, and you have to have a common tradition that then you can hand on to the people who come after you. Otherwise the lamp is not inexhaustible. But this is a chant that has deep roots in Chinese Buddhism. And so basically it is primarily associated with Japanese Buddhism today. But I think it is important for people to know. Hakuin certainly knew. Hakuin referred to it very clearly, that this is a chant that comes from the Chinese Buddhist tradition. And it's important to recognize that. But it's also important to recognize that it's really messy. When you start looking, if you really want to know where things come from, and you start looking into something like this, it's an excellent way to cultivate don't know mind, because we don't know. And anyway, so here's the kind of last thing where Chun Fang Yu gets down really deep into the weeds and says, well, what about these last four phrases that you can't find any trace of? Well, there can be a little bit of them in the King Cow Sutra. But if you look at another sutra, and this is the Wade Giles, this is not even pinyin, but it's a Chuku, Quanchi, and Ching, whatever Chuku means. Quanchi and Ching is pretty clear, Kanzeon Sutra, which is also sometimes thought of as so this is Cow Wang, this is King Cow Wang, Quan Chi and Ching. It contains the following phrases: I chant or think Quan Chi in the morning. I chant Quan Chi in the evening. I chant Quan Chi while sitting. I chant Quan Chi while walking. Each chanting gives rise to another chanting. Buddha invocation does not depart from the mind. This is very, very, very close to the last four phrases of the 10-phrase Kannon Sutra. And then she cites two people, Makita and Kiriya, who have done much more detailed research on this, sorting this out and trying to figure out how these final four phrases fit into this, and comparing all the different versions of these different chants. And both of these sources that she's referring to are in Japanese. So the best that I can do is to read what Chun Fang Yu has to say about them, and I'm very grateful for that. Yeah. All right. And just lastly, I just want to look. This is the King Cow Sutra. So, and if you can take something and fit it all on one page like this, it's not that long. It's a lot longer than the 10 phrase Kannon Sutra. And this is right up here. This link up here. This is a link to a Chinese language web page which has the sutra on it. This is a direct link to the Chinese Buddhist English text association version of the original version of this King Cow Sutra. These are both essentially the same. And here I've highlighted in red, these are the only 3 places where there's an exact match for the Kannon Sutra. The places, the characters that are really big and in black are where it's pretty close. Here's 2 examples of nen nen. Neither one of them are like the nen nen that's in the at the end of the Kannon Sutra, but still, you see nen nen, it kind of looks similar. And then in blue is all the places where Kanzeon or Quanqian is repeated. So in the Kanzeon chant, Kanzeon is repeated 3 times, and this chant is repeated many more times than that. Anyway, so that's we can clearly say that the Kanzeon chant comes from China. It's associated very clearly with the story that Hakuin associated it with. And that association goes way, way back to before the Tang Dynasty. So that's pretty clear. We'll end with chanting the Kanzeon one more time and then saying the 4 vows together. Before we go to that, are there any questions or comments or?
Hey, my comment is that I'm not sure if our friend would have survived his execution if he had to do the King Cow version.
Well, that's the whole point. I mean, it's so the shortness of it, and which is why whenever people do the Kanzeon chant, I've never heard of anybody doing it like once. And a lot of times people will do like a mantra or a dharani like 3 times, but usually people do the Kanzeon chant at least 9 times. I remember one time I was sitting with a group where a new person was doing the moktak for the first time, and she hadn't really been told, what to do, and so she just assumed that we were doing the Kanzeon chant 108 times. And someone eventually had to stop her and say, okay, we've done it enough. Time to move on to the next chant. But maybe she was channeling one of these people whose lives had been spared by the chant. But
or she knew what the fox spirit had advised.
Yeah, right. Well, so one time I was doing moktak for a group. I think Elizabeth might have been there when we hosted a group at my house on New Year's and we did do the Kanzeon chant 108 times. And I was in charge of them. I was doing the moktak, and I looked at the watch, and it was like 10 till. We were supposed to finish the 108th repetition at midnight, and it was like 10 till midnight, and I realized I was going to have to speed way up to make it, and we did. We made it.
Good.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Okay. So I'm going to, let's see, still sharing my screen. Let's see if I can bring up what I need to bring up so that we can look at. Oh, I think I did. I'm going to stop sharing my screen temporarily. Just have to find the chant again. Fortunately, it's still right there. All right. Okay. We'll do the chanting one more time, and then we'll recite the 4 vows.
Enmei juku kannon yo.
Kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en yo butsu en yo butsu en bukboso en joraku ga jojo nen kanseon bonen kanseon nen nen jushin ki nen nen furishin kanseon namu butsu yo butsu en bukboso en joraku ga jojo nen kanseon bonen kanseon nen nen jushin ki nen nen furishin kanseon namu butsu yo butsu en bukboso en joraku ga jojo nen kanseon bonen kanseon nen nen jushin ki nen nen furishin kanseon namu butsu yo butsu en bukboso en joraku ga jojo nen kanseon bonen kanseon nen nen jushin ki nen nen furishin kanseon namu butsu en bukboso en joraku ga jojo nen kanseon bonen kanseon nen nen jushin ki nen nen furishin kanseon namu butsu en bukboso en joraku ga jojo nen kanseon bonen kanseon nen nen jushin ki nen nen furishin.
Okay, we're not going to do the evening bell chant. We could. We're going to do 4 great vows. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. Delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to attain it. May whatever excellent qualities we have gained from this practice be extended for the benefit of all beings. Thanks for coming. Great to see you. And thanks for watching. Anybody who's seeing this later. Good night, Joe. Good night, Elizabeth.
Very
Bye.
interesting.
Thank you.
Bye.